Fake interactions with people where you say you love each other and you barely know each
best
other.
friends.
Oh, girl, you're so amazing.
You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, how would I know you?
In drugs.
I would have met in some toilet somewhere.
Hi guys, and welcome to The Truth Hurts with me, Tony Quinn. Today we have an awesome guest. We have Dugan, who's come to share his story with us. I met Dugan in the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous. I saw this amazing man just sitting there and sharing his story, and I was like, I can sit here for the whole meeting and just listen to this dude talk. So I'm pretty sure you're all going to feel the same when he shares his story with us. So, dude, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you ended up in the rooms?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and hi, Tony. Thank you very much for having me on the channel. So, I grew up in Joburg. I'm like the original Joburg guy. My parents are Joburgers, and I had the kind of slightly eccentric childhood, but nothing super weird. Although, when I was about 15 or 16, I developed a hectic weed smoking habit that got worse when I got conscripted into the apartheid army in 1986, and I became essentially really dependent on weed as a way of dealing with stuff. And I think what weed does is it gives you a big green fluffy blanket between you and the world and allows you to really muffle everything. And so those 2 years I think really were foundational and incredibly formative for me in developing a practice around being inauthentic and developing a fake personality.
Yeah, I get that.
And I think for a lot of people there's that kind of experience. But I also met a woman and fell madly in love with her, and she was very disruptive, and my relationship was quite transgressive because she was quite a lot older than me, and my parents loathed her, so obviously we had to get married.
Oh, that's what you do.
Obviously.
When your family hates someone, you go all
married full on. So over those married years, we had 2 children and we adopted 2 children, and I was pretty much your daddy in the suburbs. Married daddy in the suburbs with a kind of big weed habit, but also very engaged politically. It was like the anti-apartheid years and then the immediate kind of democracy years, and it was very inspiring and exciting time to be living in South Africa. It felt like we were the cutting edge of political development, and I was active in government, and professionally it was a very exciting time to be alive, and my family life was very fulfilling and I was very happy. But there was always this dark secret that made me feel that I wasn't living my truth, and that was the fact that I was essentially gay. And so around the age of 31, I started seeing a therapist, and she made me understand that being gay was not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Which was weird because I was like friends with a lot of gay people, and I never really thought of it as a sin or kind of like beyond the pale. But for me personally, it was something I just couldn't confront. And so around the time I started, exploring that side, one night I stumbled upon a dealer in the road who literally, I think those guys are really masters of spotting the vulnerable creature.
They know.
Yeah, I think we emit a signal, and he said, "Hey, my brother." And that was my introduction to cocaine. And initially it was like something I did privately. Then I met this guy, and very quickly, like within 3 months, I had left my marriage and moved out, and I started using frantically, like a lot. And one night I met my dealer, and there was a mix-up, and I met somebody else's dealer, and instead of buying coke, I bought tablets, which I'd never heard before. And started using E all the time. Like, literally on a Tuesday night going to... What was that club on Louis Vuitton? No, on Louis Vuitton.
I don't know. It's a club on Louis Vuitton. Which one?
Hey?
Blue Nachi.
No. This was way before Blue Nachi. It was like... Anyway. Like a Tuesday night at a hip-hop club at the age of 32 on my own, on the dance floor. And a lot of kind of random sex and terrible behavior. But honestly, the best fun.
Yeah.
Like, quite... manageable, although not really.
Well, manageable to where you are, I'm sure.
Yeah, by comparison, it was pretty good times.
Yes.
And at the same time, in Joburg at the time, there was a massive explosion of gay culture in Braamfontein. And there was like a gay district, and there were these amazing clubs. There was a club called Therapy that I basically just moved into. Yeah, it was fantastic. And it kind of, in retrospect, felt like kind of a golden era. But there were a lot of really insane and hectic escapades, like getting arrested in Hillbrow and...
That sounds classy. That sounds like a good time. The best years.
At the time, I was working for a very senior politician, and like for me to have been arrested would have just been absolutely catastrophic. And I cried and begged for mercy, and things were fine. I mean, I also kind of enjoyed the sense of being a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like being this technician in senior roles in NGOs and in government, but at the same time having this hectic party life. And that kind of binary, paradoxical existence really fed a sense of exceptionalism. So I enjoyed feeling a bit special.
And feel better than everyone else.
And then I had a little secret, a little dirty secret that was burnished, and I really polished it and I grew it, and and I had a good time. And I'd say until so my ex-wife and I split up and I started partying in about 2000, and till about 2003, 2004, it was... I mean, I was irresponsible and I was a bad parent, and I think possibly of all the regrets that I have, my failure to really be present for my children is the thing I regret the most, because even when I was there physically, which was actually a lot of the time because I had a whole set of boundaries that I set for myself, in reality, I was just waiting so that I could leave to go and use. And not only that, but I was also impaired. Like, I was literally... The Walking Dead, because I hadn't slept the night before, or was coming down, or just hungover. I was like a husk. But I probably could have carried on like that for a long time. But then one night, a friend of mine borrowed my phone to phone his crystal dealer.
Those are the best.
And that was really like a major turning point for me. And... kind of settled into using crystal in a way that was, in retrospect, literally insane. Like, I look back on that guy and I have no flash of recognition. I don't know what went on, because my inability to manage my using was kind of astonishing. And over... I guess like 2 years, it just spiraled out of any proportion.
Do you find it hard to recognize time during those years? Like, for me, I look back, I'm like, was it 3 years? Was it 4 years? Was it a day? Time becomes
absolutely. And not only that, the only reason I can actually recall the years is because I've sat down with a pen and paper and I've plotted it out. I mean, I have to remember where I was living and try and say, okay, so I was there, so then, okay, and my daughter was that age, so therefore this is what the year was, and so that's what was going on. But I've often thought to myself, like, what was it about that sensation that was so mesmerizing? And I guess it's the kind of very standard addict thing about just loving the chaotic oblivion.
Yes.
And that sense of losing myself in this completely fragmented, shattered reality. And it came with a whole lot of stuff around like insane sex, insane letting people down, insane not showing up, insane making arrangements and then just pulling out, and like major stuff, like agreeing to go and see somebody in Cape Town and then landing up just smoking my lolly by the side of the highway and missing the flight and then calling the whole trip off and then letting people down, or
ruining opportunities.
And professionally it was just catastrophic. People never really know what's going on, but what I did get was a reputation for unreliability, and people were like, well, we just can't use this guy. And the other thing that happened was that I developed this major fondness for tranks, because
Tranquilizers guy.
the only way I could sleep was to take something to sleep. And so I would get into the space where I hadn't eaten and I hadn't slept for 3 or 4 days, and then I would take a tranquilizer, and then I would sleep for 3 or 4 days, and then there would be this, my ex-wife and my kids would be desperately trying to get hold of me, and people would think I was dead, and there were all these like suicide stories, and it was horrendous. So my kind of, I guess, annus horribilis was 2008, where things just basically came unstuck completely for me. And it was the year I turned 40, and a whole lot of things that I had basically been managing to hold together and could no longer sustain. And so the year started with my 40th birthday, and it was completely insane. It was like at my brother's house, and there were these two distinct groups of people. There were my using friends who were absolutely lunatic, and then my family and my straight friends, and it was like operating in this dual reality. But the year just unspooled into complete catastrophe and involved me having a terrible car crash and smashing into a bucky full of workers, and then landing up in the middle of nowhere and having to drive with a smashed car and terrible insurance claim, and then my rental car being broken into, and my laptop with all my work on it being stolen, and my ex-wife discovering my stash and my paraphernalia, and then just having no money and things just being absolutely desperate, and then a series of events in the December of that year. So I had this kind of absolutely dismal 2008, and by December of 2008 some other things went down with my kids, and my daughter found me smoking meth and told my ex-wife, and for her that was a point where she just said, okay, you actually can't see the kids anymore unless you test positive, unless you test clean before and after the visit. And so this was December 2008, and I just remember thinking to myself, I hate myself. I hate this lifestyle. I'm no longer in control of who and what I am. Why am I doing this? And I have a very close friend who took me to my first NA meeting, and I was still using. And I remember going to this weird room full of people, and there's this whole jargon, this whole way of speaking, this whole idiom that is bizarre to an outsider.
Cult.
It's a total cult.
Cult, guys.
The best cult. But I just remember being all obsessed with the wrong things, like the hot boy who was talking about his relapse, and I was like, oh, tell me about that relapse.
I'm here to listen.
Yeah, tell me the things. And so that was in December 2008, and then also I was absolutely broke, and I made this decision like, okay, you know what, let me do an outpatient program at a rehab. I can just get my meth use down to like, payday.
Yes, of course.
Obviously.
I can manage it.
I can totally manage it. I'll be able to get my ex-wife off my back. I'll be able to see the kids. I'll just like reel things in a little. Like if I can just put a lid on it. And so in very early January 2009, I started an outpatient program at a rehab. and it was like entering a parallel reality. It was transformational, and it was like suddenly I learned another language, and that a whole lot of things that had completely passed me by, I could suddenly interpret, which was astonishing, because people talked about things that I couldn't have ever imagined having a conversation about. Like, there's almost a competition in NA to be as honest as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Whereas previously, I really specialized in being shallow and like skating along the surface in a really brittle, bitchy way. And suddenly the competition was to be as real and authentic and as gritty and as genuine as possible. And so suddenly I discovered this whole new world, and part of the outpatient program was to go to meetings every night, and I just never used again. And no one is more astonished than me, because I used to see the prospect of not using drugs as entering like a kind of twilight life. Like, the only thing that gave my life color, the only thing that made it energetic in any way, the only way that I was animated was because of, at the very least, a joint.
Yeah.
But preferably something much harder.
A
lolly or a tablet. And I mean, I did literally all the things, like crack and heroin and everything. Suddenly I was in this world where it was this absolutely bracing, energizing truth that was way beyond any drug experience. And I remember feeling like a freshly scrubbed nerve. And
I like that. Because that is what it feels like. You're feeling new things.
You just feel like you actually had all your protective layers stripped off, and there you are, like raw and so sensitive. I remember literally, and I mean, I know this is so lame and like a thing, but I remember saying to a cashier at Pick n Pay, "It's 2 weeks since I took drugs." And she was like, okay.
This was me 2 weeks ago. Look at this picture.
Look how thin I was. So there I was suddenly in this world, and I didn't even make a commitment to it initially, because it was really only about managing this catastrophic situation.
Exact same thing with me.
And then suddenly, like 2 or 3 months in, I kind of made this merry band of outlaws who were also kind of, I'm not your average NA guy,
No.
I'm not your little steroid gym bunny who's a straight man who's actually basically there for the babes. I was like very off the NA script. And so I found these other weirdos, like people, some of whom worked in the same field that I work in, or who were completely different but who were also slightly older, who were also unconventional, also queers. And they became we became really fuss. It became a real thing, and I just got into a thing where I went to a meeting every night. And I went to a meeting every night for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And every night after the meeting, I would go for a coffee, or preferably a large pizza and a dessert and a cappuccino, and I gained 35 kilograms, which was probably the major downside of recovery. Like, that massive weight gain meant that while I changed as a person, I also changed physically. And so I would sometimes catch a glimpse of myself in a mirror as I walked through a mall, and I would be like, oh my God, who's the fat guy? And it was me. And I've never really lost all that weight. But I think of it as partly being like a much more substantial person in the world, and it's fine. And if that's the price, I'm happy to pay it.
Yeah.
But those years of early recovery were literally, I mean, I've used the word already, but I'll use it again, profoundly transformational. It was like a whole lot of stuff that was just in sealed containers in my deepest, darkest recesses were opened, and I developed a capacity to talk about stuff like my sexuality and my sexual conduct and my professional work and my relationships with my peers and my parents and my siblings and my children and my ex-wife, and to discuss my personality defects and to just be incredibly upfront and open.
To own your shit.
To own my shit, to be absolutely honest. And I think it's been, the work that I do is to help people talk about the performance that they achieve in the programs that they implement. And I do feel like it's made me professionally much more effective, because I've reached a place where I'm like, no, you're not like really talking about what's going on. And that's a major attribute. It's a real asset. I remember being on a dance floor in a club one time and somebody said to me that they were going to rehab, and I was like, oh, poor thing. Because my sense of what that entailed was of losing, like it was a negative experience.
Yeah.
And the early years were really hard. And in particular, the first year was very tough. It was essentially about reinventing myself and repatterning and reprogramming what worked for me. And meetings were absolutely critical to that. And so showing up every night and getting that 30-day tag, the 60-day tag, the 90-day tag. And I think I'm a slight exhibitionist in the ways that I engage with the world. And I've found meetings just the perfect platform where I could just share what was going on for me. I'm a very good listener, and I always, even when most of the meeting was shit, I would hear something that would really leave me thinking hard about life. And so the skill in a meeting is actually to listen for that share, because it comes, and it's often towards the end when you're just like, oh my God. And then someone will just say something that is so insightful and so useful and completely helpful.
Yeah.
But those early years were difficult, and especially the first year, because the major thing was that I gained all this weight, and then I couldn't sleep. Meth messes up your sleep, and so I spent 9 or 10 months just literally not sleeping, or falling asleep as the sun came up.
And not being able to take a tranquilizer.
Not being able to take a tranquilizer, and also there was that whole thing of, I don't know if you had it, but when I was using, I had this absolute horror of the birds.
When you hear that sound,
God.
you've
the
wasted.
birds tweeting, and you're like, oh fuck! I said I wasn't going to do this, and now the birds! And so I was still hearing the birds, but I had been awake and sober the whole time. And so year one was tough, and like people would say drink chamomile tea, and I was broke. I couldn't afford chamomile tea, and I remember a sweet woman bought me a big packet of chamomile teas, and people were so sweet. So I was broke and I was struggling, and I think it was great that I was broke, because I actually think that if I'd had any money, I might have relapsed and just spent the money on drugs. And year one was really hard, and it just was like, just get through it and show up at the meeting and talk about it and connect with people and forge this little band of outlaws and do the things, and had a great sponsor who was really tough, and it felt like a project.
Yeah.
It was like the project of my life at the time. It was what I was doing. And I think that's the big lesson in early recovery is, if you're doing something else, put it on hold.
Yes.
Because this thing of getting yourself off the groove that you're in and onto a different groove is going to take a lot of energy.
Exactly.
And a lot of time and a lot of emotional energy in ways that you don't even know are required.
It's not a quick fix like drugs.
No. And it's really about saying, I was on a path that didn't work for me and I want to get myself on a different path. So that was year one. And I remember my first year share actually being unable to believe that I had gone 365 days without drugs. It was indescribable. And I remember that person on the dance floor hearing somebody saying they were going to rehab and just thinking to myself, well, that's something I could never do. And so there I was, a year clean, and I was shocked. I was shook.
I was shook.
And those years have gradually unspooled, and like the second year was also hard, but less hard. And I think what drove me in those first in that first phase of recovery was a real terror of going back to that experience of, my flat looked like a crack house. I had sort of torn
It was
up
a crack house.
It was a crack house. And I'd torn up the carpets and done all this weird stuff, and it was all that craziness. But gradually, so I was really driven by a horror of returning to that state, and a very rank torment that I would go back to this person who had written in black Koki pen on his front door, "No."
That makes sense.
Meaning, no, do not phone the dealer.
Did you do that?
Yeah.
All right.
And I phoned the dealer every time.
Oh, God.
But
That's the most meth thing I've ever heard.
literally, a big no written on my door. I remember once coming back from a binge and I had just been to the dealer and I had finally decided I had to eat something and I bought a pizza. And I had the meth on the top of the pizza box and I got in the lift in my building and the box fell over and the meth fell down the crack into the lift shaft.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Oh, it was the worst thing. And I spent the rest of that night with various things like getting sticky tape and press stick and sticking it down the lift shaft and then
God.
like the crazy. And then the next day I saw a lift technician arriving and I said to him, I dropped my son's, what do you call it? Fishbowl chemicals down the lift. Can you see if you can find it for me? And he was like, no. But that world, the terror of returning to that world is what really drove me in those early years. And at the same time, what was going on in parallel was a different Dugan was emerging. And that was a Dugan that was on a different course. And the reasons for staying clean gradually shifted from a terror of returning to who I was to a gratitude and an appreciation of who I was becoming. And that has really been what's kept me clean over the last few years, that I have become the kind of parent I want to be. I have a very, very good relationship with my children who I adore, and who know everything about my life. There's no piece of me that they don't know about.
That's amazing.
Professionally, it's just worked so well. And more than anything, I just feel very at ease with myself in a way that I couldn't have imagined before, because there was so much about myself that I needed to not engage with. And so on the 6th of January, it was 11 years that I've been clean. Yay!
NA! Hi!
Hugs! And of course my recovery is not squeaky clean like it was. I will take the Miprodol when I could have just had the Disprint.
Oh, yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, and so the boundaries are blurry, and I'm not Mr. Captain Recovery by a long shot. I sometimes make dodgy choices, and
You can't be perfect in a recovery. There's no such thing.
well, I'm sure some people can, but I certainly can't. And
Same, girl.
But I haven't smoked meth, and I haven't smoked weed, and I haven't drunk alcohol. And I mean, there is stuff about the NA model that's problematic, and it doesn't work for everybody. I do feel like the abstention thing, for some people, is just impossible. They just can't do it. I know a lot of people who, it's just it's like an entry requirement that's set too high. I think some people can get there, but to set it as the starting point means that they just never get into the groove. And I understand that. And I do feel like 11 years in, there are still aspects of drug taking that I really miss. I miss the fuzziness of a spliff, or I miss the glamour of a sparkling white wine. And I do mind that wake me up at 3 a.m. and I'm the same Dugan I was at midday. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm always the same guy. And it's always, what's the word I want? Like, cold, sober, me, flat out. And I'm a bit bored of myself.
Do you struggle with that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do miss the...
Do you miss the chaos?
I miss the chaos, I miss the oblivion, and I miss the option to be a more chilled person. That I see my counterparts becoming when they have a glass or two of wine. But at the same time, on glass 3 of wine, they start telling me the same story, and I think to myself, oh God, really?
It gets pathetic,
yeah,
right?
You're pathetic. Just, I'm going to go to my room now, okay?
But so when I go out, all my friends drink.
Yeah.
I've got a few that are in recovery, but we don't go out all the time.
Yeah.
But when I go out with my mates and they drink, when I feel a bit uncomfortable, that's when I bounce.
Look, I used to have a thing I called the 90-minute rule.
Yeah.
Which was like, start the interaction and then 90 minutes in, I leave.
I think I do that without knowing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I do feel like the thing about substances is that there's a cool stage and then they just degenerate into kind of stupidity.
Exactly.
And that was my whole thing. Like, if that's my drug career, like, it was fun in those early years and then it just became actually nightmarish.
Yeah.
Like, frankly, tortuous, like driving around weird parts of town, waiting to meet dealers in the most terrible places, and those fake interactions with people where you say you love each other and you barely know each other.
Best friends.
Oh, girl, you're so amazing.
You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I love you.
And now, like I was saying when we were chatting before the shoot, like, really when you manage your life, you're running a balance sheet, and there are costs and there are benefits, and you make a decision about what's worth what, and the chaos and the fuzziness and the laughs are not worth the price.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about the gifts of recovery and what you've experienced.
Wow. I mean, I'm such a kind of like poster boy for recovery and NA, because when I think about who I was and where I was at in 2009, January the 6th, and who I am now, I am so grateful. The gifts have just been both material and intangible, and they relate, I guess, more than anything to the kinds of relationships that I have with people now. And it's both much stronger and deeper relationships with people that I already knew.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot of relationships ended, like relationships with good people, but that involved a kind of toxic dynamic. So all those like party friends that I had, who I was really close to and who I thought were my besties, I just don't have anything to do with anymore. Yeah. And that's not a judgment on them, it's my inability to manage those contexts. And then it's a whole lot of new relationships with people that are just fabulous, like people like you.
Hey!
Who I would never know.
Yeah,
I mean, how would I know you?
Drugs.
I would have met in some toilet somewhere, waiting for a booth to open up.
Sorry guys, my mom has arrived.
So yeah, the people have been great. The relationships have been really, like, just taken things to a different place. And I think what is the single most defining feature of being in recovery has been an ability to have honest, super frank conversations about what's really going on.
Yeah.
And I find now that I'm not really able to deal with inauthentic bullshit. Like, I really want to know what's actually happening, and if you can't do that, then we're not on the same page, and we're not going to connect. And that's your call, but what recovery has been about for me is reinventing myself, making a decision that the benefits of the way that I live now far outweigh any kinds of pleasures that arise as a result of using substances, and connecting with people in a real way. And that has just changed my life.
Oh, that's amazing, Dugan. Guys, like, okay, seeing you in the rooms, you know when you said meetings are important because you need to listen, and that's what meetings are really about. I promise you, Dugan, I will never forget you, because you're the first person I remember from a meeting.
Really?
You're the first person I remember. Everyone else is just this blur of faces, and like, I was unhappy being there. I hated being there.
Yeah.
And then you spoke, and I don't remember what it was. You were talking about an existential crisis.
Was it at Benmore?
It was at Benmore, Tuesday night.
Okay.
And you spoke, and that affected me. And I always remembered you. When I went back to rehab, we went to that Tuesday night meeting again.
Yeah, it was a regular. Yeah.
Yes. and the only person I wanted to see was you.
And I would have been there.
You were there.
Yeah, I was
You were
always
there.
there for years and years, yeah.
And you remembered me. And that was so amazing about NA, is that people really give a shit.
Yeah, they do. It's weird. They really connect, and it's like a genuine relationship.
It's beautiful. You don't have to see that person for like years, and you just hope that they're still in recovery and they're doing well. And you taught me a lot in recovery. My sponsor was your sponsee. You're my grand sponsee. But I just want to say thank you for sharing your story with everyone. And you, like, I know how far you've come, and I know your whole story. And for anyone out there, if you're living this chaotic life and you feel like there's no way out, I promise you there fucking is, because we've got a person right here.
A living example. A fossil.
A fossil of this. No, Dugan, thank you. And thank you for being in the rooms as well. And thank you for sharing your story with everyone, because people need to fucking hear it.
Yeah.
And thank you for inspiring me in my recovery. And thank you for giving a shit. So, yeah.
Thank you for being you.
Thanks, dudes.
Judy.
Dugan, everyone. Peace. Guys, thank you for listening. And Dugan, thank you for being on the show. And we look forward to sharing more stories with you guys. Let us know what you think. Leave a comment down below and we can continue the discussion. So, yeah. Thanks, guys.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.